Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Werner Schmidt, and I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 34 years old. Before the war, my world was a simple, understandable machine. It smelled of wet asphalt after a summer rain, of stale cigar smoke and linseed oil used to polish the wooden desks at the Munich Presidium. I was a police officer, you see, a detective. To me, a crime was a mechanical failure, a disruption in the public order. My job was to find the broken gear, the stripped wire, the faulty component, and remove it so the great, humming engine of the city could run smoothly again. I believed in files, in evidence, in procedure. I believed that if you followed the steps, you would always arrive at the truth. The war taught me that some machines are designed to run on lies. And the most important job is not to fix the machine, but to keep it running, no matter how many broken parts you have to hide inside the casing. People imagine my work in the SD was a world away from being a city detective. In some ways it was. The stakes were higher, the consequences more final, but the process, my process, remained the same. You start with a loose thread and you pull. You follow it through the labyrinth, ignoring the noise and the politics, until it leads you to the source of the rot. I was good at it because I was methodical. I still believed in the elegant logic of a well-kept ledger. But in the summer of 1943, in a dusty, fly-blown command post somewhere in the occupied East, I was handed a file that would challenge all of that. What do you do when the thread you are pulling, the one that threatens the entire German war machine, leads you back to the very man who first taught you how to hold it? The air in that room was thick enough to chew, a mix of cheap Russian tobacco, sweat, and the ever-present smell of diesel fumes that seemed to seep in from the very soil. Outside, the world was a canvas of dust and heat, the sun beating down on the endless steppe, baking the life out of everything. But inside, we were preparing for Operation Citadel, the great cleansing, the decisive blow that would shatter the Red Army at the Kursk salient. The maps on the wall were a spiderweb of arrows and designations, showing the movements of entire panzer armies. It was the most secret, most vital information in the Reich, and it was leaking. The leak was subtle, a ghost, not entire battle plans, but small, critical details, the precise location of a forward supply depot, the operational readiness of a specific panzer division, things that would allow the Soviets to anticipate our punches with uncanny accuracy. My commander, a man whose face was a permanent mask of weary cynicism, slid a thin manila folder across the table. My name was on it. The case was mine. I began as I always had, like a Munich detective investigating a string of burglaries. I sat in my small, partitioned office, a single bare bulb hanging overhead, and I built my case. I ignored the grand scope of the war raging just beyond the thin walls. I focused on the mechanics of the problem. I collected signals, intelligence intercepts, cross-referenced troop movement logs, duty rosters, leave requests. For days, my world shrank to columns of names and numbers. I lived on black coffee and a growing sense of cold certainty. It was methodical work, comforting in its familiarity. I could almost smell the chalk dust of the old briefing room back home, hear the satisfying clack of a case file being stamped closed. I built a matrix, a web of access and opportunity. Who saw the fuel reports? Who had access to the signals from 4th Panzer Army? Who was in command post Omega during the specific hours a transmission was intercepted? The list of names grew, then shrank. I pulled the threads, and the fabric of the conspiracy began to take shape. It was a professional thrill, the same one I felt when closing in on a killer on the streets of Munich. The feeling of order being imposed upon chaos. And then I saw it. A name, Klaus Richter. The world stopped. The buzzing of the flies against the window pane faded. The distant rumble of trucks died away. It was just that name, typed neatly on a personnel roster. Hauptsturmführer Klaus Richter. My heart, which had been a steady, professional metronome, began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. It couldn't be. Not him. Richter was the man who had pulled me from a uniformed beat and put me in plain clothes. He was my mentor at the Presidium, A legend. He taught me how to read a man's lies in the sweat on his upper lip. He taught me to look for the one detail that didn't fit, the emotional residue left behind at a crime scene. When you find what a man loves, he used to say, you have found his lever. His voice, a low Bavarian rumble, echoed in my head. I owed my entire career to him. My first instinct, the policeman's instinct, was to find the error in my own work. I checked the data again and again. There was no error. The timelines, the access, the opportunities, they all pointed to his section. In a pattern of coded outbound signals, masked as routine supply requisitions, originated from a transmitter he, and only two others, had the codes for. The truth was there, stark and ugly on the page. The machine wasn't just broken. One of its chief designers was committing sabotage. This was where the policeman in me died. A policeman would have assembled the evidence, written a report, and made the arrest, order restored. But I was not a policeman anymore. I was an officer of the Sicherheitsdienst, and the health of the state was the only law. If I arrested a man like Richter, a respected officer, the investigation would spread like a cancer. It would lead to his contacts, his superiors. It would cause panic and distrust throughout the command structure. Right on the eve of the most important offensive of the war, my commander didn't want the truth. He wanted the lake plugged. Quietly, finally, even more. My own survival instinct screamed at me. A direct accusation against a man of Richter's standing. If I was wrong by even a single detail, if he had a powerful friend who chose to protect him, it would be my career, my life. That ended. My carefully constructed identity as a ruthlessly efficient officer would be annihilated. My family back in Munich would pay the price for my failure. The fear was a cold, metallic taste in the back of my throat. I had to solve the problem, not the crime. So I began to build a new machine. A machine of lies. I found my pawn. A young Hauptsturmführer in Richter's section. An ambitious boy, a little too eager, who had made a few careless mistakes in his paperwork. He was the perfect scaffolding on which to build a fiction. I spent 2 days fabricating a case against him. I altered transmission logs, just by a single digit here and there. I created a false witness, a radio operator I could pressure into signing a statement. I worked with the cold, meticulous precision Richter himself had taught me, but I was using it to build a cage for an innocent man. Then I requested a meeting with Richter. I asked him to assist me, as a senior officer, in reviewing the final evidence before I made my arrest. Professional courtesy, I called it. He walked into my office, and for a moment, he was just my old mentor. He was grayer, thinner, but the eyes were the same, sharp, analytical, missing nothing. He smelled of the same expensive cigars he used to smoke in Munich, a sensory ghost that almost buckled my knees. He smiled. Werner, good to see you putting those skills I taught you to good use. Come, show me what you have. Let's see if the student has surpassed the master. My hands were steady as I laid the files on the desk between us. My voice was even. I became the machine. I walked him through the case I had built against the young officer. The fabricated logs, the coerced statement, the circumstantial evidence that all pointed to this one. Foolish boy. I didn't look at Richter. I looked at the papers, my finger tracing the lines of my own lies. I spoke for 10 minutes. The silence in the room was absolute. When I finished, I pushed the final summary across the desk. I finally lifted my eyes to meet his, and I saw it. I saw everything. There was no shock, no outrage on behalf of his subordinate. There was only a flicker, a brief, terrifying moment of naked understanding in his eyes. He saw the flimsy construction of my case. He saw the holes, the convenient coincidences. He was the best detective I ever knew. Of course he saw it, and in seeing my shoddy work, he saw my genius. He understood that the case wasn't meant to convince him of the boy's guilt. It was meant to convince him that I knew. I wasn't showing him a suspect. I was showing him an escape route, a sacrificial lamb. His face was a stone mask, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the desk. The air crackled. It was a silent confession, an interrogation without a single question asked. He knew that I knew, and he knew that I was offering him a choice. Condemn your subordinate and walk away, or we both go down in flames and take half the command structure with us. What a man loves, he had told me, is his lever. And Klaus Richter, I realized, loved himself more than any cause, any country, any student. He picked up the pen from my desk. His hand was perfectly still. He initialed the bottom of the arrest order for the Hauptsturmführer. A sound piece of work, Werner, he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. A bit thin on motive, perhaps, but the evidence is compelling. You've done the Reich a great service. He pushed the file back to me. The gear had been replaced. The machine was running again. As he left my office, he paused at the door and looked back. There was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not respect, not fear. It was recognition. The look a wolf gives another wolf across a fresh kill. Then he was gone. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of the young officer being dragged away down the hall. I had closed my case. I had plugged the leak. I had saved the operation. I had protected myself, my family. I had done my duty. And I had never felt so much like a criminal in my entire life. I spent the rest of my life working with systems, with rules and with ledgers. But I never again believed they could lie to the truth. In Munich, we removed the broken parts to fix the machine of the city. On the Eastern Front, I learned that some machines are not meant to be fixed. To keep them running, you have to feed them parts of yourself, piece by piece, until you are just another ghost in the gears. The policeman in me believed in restoring order. But the man I became, he understood that sometimes the only way to serve the system is to perfect its corruption. People want to hear stories of good versus evil from the war. They want heroes and villains. The hardest lesson, the one that stays with you in the quiet hours before dawn, is this. In moments of true crisis, you rarely get to choose between right and wrong. You choose between two different kinds of betrayal. You choose which part of your own soul you are willing to sacrifice on the altar of survival. I made my choice, and I have spent a lifetime living with the echo of that young man's boots being dragged down that dusty hallway. This memory is my final report, the one I never filed. It's heavy. Help me carry it. Subscribe and ensure these stories are never left to rust in silence.